Chapter 301 Emergency Rescue. The child caught a cold and has a high fever. I am here to ask if there's any fever medicine. Qian Shisan asked. Please save the child. He's still young, and he can't die like this. The man kneeled with his child. Get up first, come in and let me take a look. If it doesn't work, we'll have to send you all to town as soon as possible. After Zhouing finished speaking, she turned around and walked into the house. When the man heard this, he immediately carried his child and followed in. Qian Shisan also followed immediately. After entering the west room, Zhouing asked the man to put the child on the bed. After ensuring that the child had only caught a cold and had a high fever, she used medical alcohol to wipe his body. After that, she found the scraping board and scraped the child's back, giving him gua sha treatment. She scraped back and forth on some of the more heavily discolored areas, stopping only when the color faded. Qian Shisan looked at the child, whose expression had returned to normal. He reached his hand against the child's forehead and said, the fever has really gone down. It's good that it works. Zhouing exhaled a sigh of relief. She wrapped the child with a layer of gauze and said, don't let his back get wet for 24 hours. To avoid infection, do not remove the gauze. As for the medicine, I don't dare to prescribe it since the child is too young. However, I know a folk remedy. It is to boil scallions and ginger together and drink them to get rid of a cold. If you have a fever again at night, come back and let Dr. Gu take a look. He might prescribe medicine then. We do have ginger, but scallions, the man was put in a difficult position. I'll get you some. After Zhouing finished speaking, she went to the kitchen and brought him 5 small onions. Take these first, they should be enough for 2 portions. How much is it? The man reached into his pocket reluctantly. It's fine. Quickly take the child back to make the drink. Zhouing hesitated for a moment and shook her head. Thank you. Thank you so much. After the man finished speaking, he carried the child and walked out. When Zhouing saw them out, she saw the woman standing in front of the rack of dry white potato grains. She was grabbing some white potato grains and eating them. Zhou Ying's face darkened. At the same time, Qian Shisan's face also turned ugly. They were here to save the child, but as the child's mother, she didn't care about the life and death of her child and instead stole food. This was just neglectful. Of course, the man's expression looked the worst among them. He immediately roared, "You cheap woman, did I ever starve you?" The woman's body stiffened for a moment. She grabbed 2 more handfuls and quickly ran out. When the man took off his shoes and was about to throw them at her, the child in his arms started crying. He could only hug the child again. Forget it, Zhouing said. Hurry and take the child back, thank you, I really don't know how I can face you again. After the man apologized, he ran out of the village as if he were escaping. Seeing this, Zhouing said to Qian Shisan, Uncle, don't let these refugees enter the village in the future. If there is a need for medical treatment, ask them to wait for Qingrui in the morning. I understand. I've really caused you trouble today. It's okay. She didn't eat much. It's just that she's disgusted me. Also, I'm afraid that the refugees will be greedy and steal. I'll take note of this and let the village chief know. After Qian Shisan finished speaking, he hurriedly chased after the family, afraid that the woman would turn around and cause more trouble. Fortunately, the woman was probably afraid of being beaten up, so she ran all the way up the mountains without stopping. Zhouing turned around and walked to where the sweet potatoes were drying. She threw away the basket of grains the woman had touched, then turned around and went to the kitchen to make a bowl of noodles. Chapter 303 Conspiracy. On the other hand, after climbing up the mountain, the man gave the scallions to his mother and asked her to assist him in making the white ginger scallion soup. In a fit of rage, he found the woman hiding behind his in-laws. He stepped forward and pulled her out of the mother god temple. He raised his hands and gave her 2 slaps, saying, "You bitch, how could you embarrass me? I just saved your child, and you turned around and stole from our benefactor. Are you still human? What are you doing? What are you doing? How can you hit her?" The man's father-in-law ran over and pulled them away. "Ask her what she's done. I'm too embarrassed even to say it." The man pointed at the woman's nose. The father-in-law laughed. "Hey, I thought it was a big deal. It's just a few handfuls of white potatoes, and they don't lack them. Do you have to be so angry?" Hearing this, the man thought of something and pulled the woman over again. He glanced at her empty pockets and said, "Where are the white potatoes?" "In the pot." It's noon, so, when his father-in-law was halfway through his sentence, the man snorted coldly. "You traitor. Since you're so loyal to your family, then live with your family." He then turned around and returned to the mother god temple. When the woman saw this, she hurriedly chased after him. "Darling, wait. Please don't drive me away." "My mother, really, what about your son? Get lost." The man pushed her away and walked into the small shed that they had built. When the father-in-law saw this, he ignored her daughter and returned to his small shed. The woman burst into tears, but no one paid her any attention. In the end, she obediently returned to the man's side. However, there was no food for her, so she could only starve. After lunch, the man took an axe and climbed the mountain to chop firewood. He had to send 2 bundles of firewood to show his gratitude, regardless of whether they needed it. He also wanted to see if there was any more ginger, which was indispensable in the winter. At this time, in his father-in-law's house, the old woman, who was also the man's mother-in-law, said happily, "I didn't expect these white potatoes to be so filling. There were only 2 handfuls, but we can drink a bowl of mush from it." Of course. Otherwise, the 3rd prince wouldn't have offered such a high price to buy the seeds and send them to the south. The father-in-law shook his head and continued, "Sigh, if I had known there was such a good thing, I would have come to the village in advance to take some. We wouldn't have to survive on tree bark, leaves, and wild vegetable soup every day then." "Father, it's not too late now. Each family in the village got quite a lot of them. Besides, the late-planted ones are still growing in the fields." At this moment, their son walked over and whispered, "No, there are not only patrols around the village but also soldiers." "I'm afraid," the father-in-law shook his head. "What are you afraid of?" "Their patrol team is not always watching the foot of the mountain. When they leave, we can just rush over." "That's right. We won't steal from the villagers' homes. Well, just go to the fields and dig some. Otherwise, we won't be able to hold on without solid food." The mother-in-law added. Well, the father-in-law hesitated for a moment before saying, "We'll have to contact more people. Otherwise, we'll be beaten to death if we're caught. I'll get in touch with them." Actually, most people have the same idea. Otherwise, how are we going to survive the winter? "Sure, but you must find someone reliable. Don't let the news leak out." "Don't worry, I'll contact them now." "Well, take action tonight." In the evening, the man gave the firewood to Qianshirsan and asked Qianshirsan to help deliver it to the Gu family. He turned around and returned to the mother god temple. Seeing his son looking around, he walked over and touched his head. "I didn't expect it to really work. The fever sure did go down." Chapter 304 got discovered. It's indeed effective, but it's best to get 2 more doses of actual medicine, just in case. The man's mother said. "That's true. It'll be troublesome if it worsens at night. I'll bring him over after dinner." The man nodded. After the meal, the man carried his child down the mountains. However, he was sternly rejected when he reached the foot of the mountain and went to the shed to find the official guarding the mountains. The man had more or less guessed the reason, but when he looked down at the child in his arms, he still pleaded, "Please, it's just the two of us this time. Just let the brothers and the patrol team follow me." "No, you wait here. I'll send someone to get Dr. Gu." The officer shook his head. The man could only sit down with the child in his arms. "Thank you, brother." The officer didn't give him a good look. When the patrol team came over, he requested them to go over and invite Dr. Gu over. Gu Qingrui had already heard about this from Zhou Ying. So after receiving the notice, he took some relatively cheap medicines and went to the foot of the mountain. After checking the child's pulse, Gu Qingrui gave him 3 doses of medicine and said, "To put it bluntly, this child is sick due to malnutrition and insufficient food. When you have time, go to the mountains to find some red dates or Chinese yam. Otherwise, he will catch a cold from time to time in the winter. He should be fine after taking these 3 doses of medicine." After he finished speaking, he passed the medicines to him. Thank you so much." "How much are the medicines?" "No need, just send down 2 more bundles of firewood to us. It will save us the trouble of going up the mountains." "You guys need firewood." The man's eyes lit up. Gu Qingrui looked at his expression and knew what he was thinking. He nodded and said, "That's right, we need them in preparation for the winter. If you have extra firewood, you can sell it to me. A bundle of 50 pounds of firewood is 5 coppers, and the shrubs to light the firewood are 3 coppers. I understand. Remember, the officer reminded the man, you can only cut branches like before. Otherwise, if you're discovered, you won't be able to live in the mountains." "I remember, yes," the man responded, carrying the medicines and his child back to the Mother God temple. After returning home, he told his brothers about the matter, which excited them a little. No matter what, they could go to the village with this little income and buy some sweet potatoes. The family happily went to sleep, but they got happy too early. After midnight, about 10 strong laborers quietly walked out of Mother God temple, carrying burlap sacks with them. 2 even brought 2 longboards as they sneaked down the mountains. However, they didn't go down the mountains directly. Instead, they walked along the mountains to the outside of the village, near a trench with lush bushes. After the patrol team left the area, they immediately placed the longboards and quickly crossed the trench. The group of people quietly rushed into the fields. When they arrived at the sweet potato field, the group of people were like mice entering a rice jar. They quickly and greedily dug up the sweet potatoes, even picking up bunches of radishes and scallions. After they had filled more than half of their sacks, they turned around and walked back. However, their luggage wasn't as light as when they came, which was much more cumbersome. Hence, they were discovered by the patrol team when they were halfway there. The group of people wanted to throw the white potatoes away and run, but they couldn't bring themselves to give up at that point. In the end, the brother-in-law of the man with the sick child said, "We have 10 people, and they have 8. We have to fight it out if it comes down to it. But what if they come up the mountains to us? Are you stupid? Let's not go back to Mother God temple. With these white sweet potatoes, we can hide for half a month." Chapter 305 Dispersing the Refugees, let's just go all out. Otherwise, we'll be skinned alive if we're caught, if we don't die from the beating. After he finished speaking, the thieves put the white potatoes aside and rushed over. When the patrol team saw this, they were stunned. When they came back to their senses, the leader of the patrol team, Qian Jiaxi, cursed, "Motherfucker, a bunch of white-eyed wolves. Don't let any of them go." After saying that, the 2 sides clashed and started fighting. There were screams soon after, which quickly attracted the attention of the other two patrol teams and officers. Not long later, they surrounded the thieves. A moment later, the refugees were pressed to the ground. Qian Jiaxi heaved a sigh of relief. Everyone, check on each other. Those who are seriously injured, go to Dr. Gu and get your wounds bandaged. The rest of you tie them up and bring them to the ancestral hall with the white potatoes over there. Alright, let's split up. Gu Qingyu responded and rushed to Gu Shengruo's place with the injured personnel. When Gu Qingrue was woken up, he was shocked to see the group of people outside. Second brother, what are you? People came down from the mountains to steal sweet potatoes and met the patrol team. Blood was spilled when they clashed. Gu Qingyu pointed at his forearm. Hurry up and come in. I'll bandage everyone up. Gu Qingrue brought them to the kitchen after he was done. After lighting the lights, he told them to wait inside and said, "There's water in the jug. If you need a drink, pour it yourself." After he finished speaking, he went to the west room to get his first aid box and began to bandage them. After Gu Qingrue was done, he gave them a few instructions and sent them back. The next day, early in the morning, Tian Jingzhong and the village chief brought all the soldiers and patrol officers to drive down the refugees from the nearby mountains. They then arranged for them to stay in the empty houses in town. As for the people who were caught, they were all arranged to work in the mill, including their family members. In the afternoon, a deputy general brought over the grains the third prince had promised. However, rice made up only a tiny part of it, while taro and sorghum were the majority. But this was enough to make Tian Jingzhong very happy. After that, he collected the white sweet potato vines that were almost dried, then some dried vegetables, which he mixed with the grains and ground into a flour-like powder. After that, the flour and taro were distributed to the grain stores controlled by various officials. They were to be distributed in limited quantities. With the sale of the flour, the underground water slowly recovered, probably due to the flood in the south. Most of the wells began to produce water once again. The number of refugees gathered in the vicinity decreased significantly, especially from the neighboring Qingshui town. Besides those from other places, most of them were preparing to go home. The refugees from other places had gathered in the warehouse again, but there were much fewer than before. The village suddenly got lively. Early one morning, Shouing was drying her sweet potatoes in the courtyard when Sixth Aunt Gu came in with a smile. She commented, "You sure are busy. Sixth Aunt Gu, you're here. Why don't you take advantage of the good weather to dry the sweet potatoes?" "Oh, how's it going at your house?" Shouing asked as she brought her a stool. "As you said, most of them were sun-dried, and the rest were buried in a hole to keep them from rotting." After she sat down, Sixth Aunt Gu said, "It's good, but it's been too cold recently. You guys have to keep an eye on it, otherwise, it'll be inedible once it's frozen." "I will." After that, she helped Shouing wash some sweet potatoes as she said, "Over the past 2 days, many people have come to the village to buy white sweet potatoes. I heard that your manor still has some in stock. Do you want to sell some?" Shouing shook her head. "The white sweet potatoes in the manor are the seeds of our county next year. If I dare to sell them privately, County Magistrate Kong will throw me into a pot of oil and fry me." Chapter 306 Buying Firewood. Sixth Aunt Gus's face turned pale, and she laughed dryly. "It's not that serious. That's your own manor, you know. We're only in charge. The real master is General Zhou. That's a pity. From what you're saying, the price of those potatoes is high." "That's right. It's 15 coppers per pound. For larger sizes, such as those from your fields, it's already gone up to 30 coppers per pound. Many people are regretting selling too early. It's so expensive. Do you know who bought it?" I'm not sure, but the price is almost as high as the price of pork. It's not something that ordinary people like us can afford to eat. There are also relatives who came to ask for information. Sigh, it's getting difficult. No matter what, keeping the food in your hands is better. That's true, but many were blinded by the money and can't understand that. Sixth Aunt Gu agreed with a nod. After that, the two of them chatted for a while, and Zhou found out more gossip through her. Because of the white potato, the villagers' days weren't peaceful. This was especially true for Gu Shengruo's old residents. They grew many late-season white sweet potatoes, and many people were eyeing them and wanting to buy them. People would come to their residences every day to tempt them. However, each family had their own plans, and they were all cunning. Other than Zhang Qingqing, who used her father's matter to threaten them and agreed to sell them 1,000 pounds, the others were all ignored. In the afternoon, Zhou was just about to take Air Zhuang to the manor when she heard someone calling her. She turned her head and saw Gu Qingye from a distance. He was walking over with a man pulling a cart full of firewood. She waited in place, and Zhou recognized the man at a glance when they came over. It was the father of the little boy she had saved a few days ago. Second brother, this is, Zhou asked. This man said that Qingruo had told him about buying firewood before. Didn't he send you a truckload today? Gu Qingye said. Does Mrs. Gu still remember me? Dr. Gu said that I could use 100 pounds of firewood as payment for the medicine. The man said. He did tell me about this, but you sure moved quickly. I didn't expect you to keep your word. Zhou opened the door and continued, if you collect more firewood, just pile it up in the shed. Don't worry. The firewood here is 50 pounds per bundle, more or less. After the man finished speaking, he pulled his small cart over. At that time, Zhou also discovered that a younger man was pushing the cart with all his might behind her. Afterward, the two put the firewood in the shed, and Zhou counted on the side. There were 12 bundles in total, about 600 pounds in total. After deducting the 100 pounds for the medicine, she needed to pay 50 coppers. In addition to the medicine, it'll give you another 50 coppers. Is that all right? She asked. Yes, 50 coppers is all right. The man smiled and nodded repeatedly. He hesitated and asked, I wonder if we can get some white sweet potato vines. Zhou was stunned for a moment. I'm sorry. We really can't do that. Our family's white sweet potatoes have all been transported away. She thought of the vegetables she had saved and continued, if you don't want money, I can give you some dried lettuce. Dried lettuce? That's even better. The man's eyes lit up. Wait a moment. Zhou turned around and went to the cellar. She took out a sack of dried lettuce weighing about 30 pounds and handed it to them. Well, take it at 2 coppers per pound, so here are 30 pounds. If you still want to collect firewood, how about we deduct it from you next time? Chapter 307 Seedlings. Oh, how much firewood do you need? Well, send it over to you in a few days. The man took the sack and threw it into his cart, nodding repeatedly. 5 more carts will do, Zhou said after some thought. This way, she could help them, and she wouldn't have to go up the mountains to chop firewood. All right, well, come over every other day. We won't disturb you any further. After the man finished speaking, he turned around and pushed his cart outside. Gu Qingye's eyes flickered when he heard that. When the refugees went up the mountain to chop branches and tree bark, their household bought their firewood along with Zhou. Although some were still left, it would be difficult to get through the winter. However, he and his big brother had been on patrol day and night. Her father and uncle still had to take care of the vegetables and sweet potatoes in the field, so they had no time to go up the mountain to gather more firewood. Even if they had the time, they probably couldn't handle that kind of work. Therefore, after they left, Gu Qingye asked, "Are you planning to keep cutting firewood? I also want to buy some. How about 2 bundles of firewood for 1 pound of white sweet potato or 1 bundle for 10 pounds of white sweet potato vines?" "Really?" the man asked in disbelief. He had been walking around the village for more than half a day, so he knew others were buying sweet potatoes at a high price of 15 coppers per pound. According to his firewood price, he was earning more than 10 coppers per pound, and he would greatly benefit from this. "I won't lie to you. Just tell me if you want to trade or not." "Well, trade, but I prefer the white potato vines." "Alright, send 10 more carts to my house once you're done. Remember to bring firewood like the ones you sent earlier. Don't try to fool me with shrubs. I won't, don't worry." On the other side, Zhou locked the door after they left and took Zhuang to the manor. She went into the field to look at the seedling situation. Needless to say, the vegetables were from seeds produced in her inner space, so the seedling was growing excellently and tenaciously. On the other hand, the 3 acres of wheat looked frail, although their yield rate was decent. Changshan, who received the news of her arrival, immediately ran over. "Mistress, you're here. This wheat looks alright, I think." "It's alright, but it looks a little frail. It's mainly because of its aged wheat. However, it'll be much better next year once we let it grow a little more." "Alright. Remember to water it once before winter. Even if it doesn't snow, we won't be short of water." "I understand." When Changshan said this, he pointed to the vegetables not far away and asked, "Mistress, what is that?" "I've never seen it before." "That's brown mustard. The yield rate of this crop is quite high, and after it's marinated, it can be cooked, fried, stuffed, steamed, and so on. There are a lot of these in the capital, but they aren't common here." "I see. If that's the case, we won't lack vegetables in the winter." "That's right, no matter what, we have to fill our stomachs." After Zhou finished speaking, she went to the cultivation area with him. She saw Manager Lu and Uncle Nian sitting under the sun, focused on playing the board game Go. She was surprised before she walked over and stood to the side to watch. After they finished a round, the two noticed Zhou standing at the side. Uncle Nian immediately stood up, but Zhou motioned for him to sit down and said, "You guys continue playing. I'm just here to take a look at the wheat seedlings and to take a look around." "Oh, right. The wheat seedling is doing fine, but there's just not enough." Manager Lu answered. "There's no other way. There are not enough seeds. By the way, what did you plant in your manor?" "Nothing else except the vegetable seeds you gave me. I'd plant all white sweet potatoes next year if the weather is decent." Chapter 308 Complaining, "You're right." Zhou nodded. Then, she paused and asked, "By the way, many came to the village over the last 2 days to buy white potatoes at the price of 15 coppers per pound. Do you know who they are? Are they really asking at such a high price? Could it be someone rich that's collecting seeds?" Manager Lu asked with a pensive look. It seemed that he would have to send someone to inquire about this. If a rich man was indeed buying these potatoes, it should be fine. He was afraid that someone was scheming something terrible, and the villagers wouldn't have enough to eat when they sold their food and would end up directing their anger at them instead. That would be troublesome. I'm not sure. I've only heard a little about it, but there are quite a lot of them in the village. Aren't they digging their own graves? Those white potatoes are their life-saving food. Changshan asked in shock. Each family has their own plans, and we can't control them. After Zhou finished speaking, she went to the cow and sheep pens. She was relieved to see that their birth rate had dropped significantly. After reminding them to store more firewood, she went directly home. When she got home, she saw it was still early, so she made a pot of millet porridge with white potatoes. After that, she kept the white potato grains hanging outside back into the house and went into her inner space to stir-fry a plate of cabbage and garlic, twice-cooked pork, and a plate of sauced beef. When Gu Qingrui returned, they immediately started eating dinner. Afterwards, when Zhou finished washing the dishes, she saw Gu Qingrui sitting in a daze at the end of the bed. She walked over and asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Gu Qingrui pulled her into his arms and replied, "There are malaria and dysentery in the south. All the antiparasitic, antibacterial, and antitoxin drugs have been transferred there. Isn't that a good thing? If they need you to concoct the medicine, it means that the imperial court is doing disaster relief." "That's true, let's hope there are fewer people dying. I'm just worried that something might happen here and that there's no medicine left." Sigh, it's been 2 years, and it's been one disaster after another. I don't know when it'll calm down. It should be soon. If this continues, humanity will go extinct. I hope so. The next morning, just as Gu Qingrui left, Mrs. Bai came looking for them. Zhou was stunned for a moment. "Auntie, what a rare guest. Come and have a seat inside." "I'm fine. I'm free, so I just came to chat with you. Let's just sit in the courtyard, it'll be warmer with the sun." "That's true. I'll just cut some more sweet potatoes and let them dry." After Zhou finished speaking, she first brought 2 chairs over. She took out a bag of white potatoes, washed them, rubbed them, and finally cut them into small pieces. "Your work is really fine. I just cut them all into slices." Mrs. Bai said it in surprise. "I'm free anyway, so you mean that you've already started drying all your potatoes?" "Yeah, we have a lot of us, and the place is big, so it's naturally faster." After the 2 of them chatted for a while, Mrs. Bai complained in a low voice. Many of the sweet potatoes at home were used to help out the village chief's daughter's family, but she wasn't allowed to help her maternal family. Also, if there was good food, it didn't matter if they had enough to eat, they would give the village chief's daughters a portion first. In short, she was dissatisfied with how the village chief handled things. Especially when it came to financial aid, the sweet potatoes given to his daughter's family were in accordance with the usual amount. When it came to her family, they only got 200 pounds of potatoes and some vegetables, which made her uncomfortable. She looked at Zhou. Don't you think this is just unfair? If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have supported letting my sister-in-law and her family stay in the village." Zhou hesitated and asked, "Auntie, did Tinius aunt take a share of your family's grain reserve? In other words, did they split your share of the white sweet potatoes?" "No, they didn't. They helped harvest, transport, and weigh the white sweet potatoes from the beginning. Thus, the 3rd prince treated her family as part of our family when they were dividing white sweet potatoes." Chapter 309 Clear-headed, right, but was the white sweet potato your family gave to the Bai family squeezed from your reserve? Zhou asked again. Mrs. Bai was stunned for a moment. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. She wasn't happy, but she wasn't stupid. After listening to Zhou Ying's analysis, she knew she was overthinking it. Although Tiny's aunt and family were assigned to their family, they did not consume their food because they worked for it. To put it bluntly, their family didn't owe her anything. Instead, the food that Mrs. Bai had given to her maternal family had been squeezed out of her own family's mouths. Zhou Ying knew she had changed her mind, so she didn't persuade her anymore. Instead, she asked, "By the way, Auntie, are you not digging for arrowroot this year?" As soon as Mrs. Bai heard her change the topic, she immediately heaved a sigh of relief and answered, "I wanted to, but the mountain has been turned over by the refugees several times. They've already dug it clean, so we can only wait for next year." "That's right. If it wasn't for the intervention of the village constable, the mountain would have turned bald a long time ago. Zhou nodded in agreement. After that, the two of them chatted for a while. Mrs. Bai collected all the sols she had been working on while chatting, got up, and returned home. When she entered her house, she saw the village chief drying some more sweet potatoes in the yard. She immediately put her shoes aside and said, "Father, I can handle this. If you have time, you should teach Tikniu how to read." The village chief was surprised that she was no longer pulling a long face, and he finally heaved a sigh of relief. "It's fine. It's cold now, so don't flip the potatoes over too often." As for why she suddenly had her head cleared, he didn't bother to ask. It was fine if the family was harmonious and there were no conflicts. Just as he stood up, he saw a teenager running in. "Grandpa Chief, hurry up and come help take a look. Our family is fighting." "You're Zhang Laosan's grandson, right? Tell me why your family is fighting." The village chief sized him up and said, "My grandfather wanted to give 800 pounds of white sweet potatoes to my aunt's family, but my mother doesn't agree. She said that if they were to give it, they would split up. This bastard, even if he really wants to help your aunt, he shouldn't just leave your family to starve." When the village chief heard this, he was dumbfounded. "But I don't think I can veto your grandfather on this matter alone. It'll go over first, but you should quickly go and find your eldest grandfather. All right, please hurry up." The boy turned around and ran away after saying that. Seeing this, the village chief simply tidied up his clothes, then went out with his hands behind his back. After listening to their conversation, Mrs. Bai had mixed feelings. It seemed that she had been too narrow-minded before. Previously, her father-in-law had given her maternal family 200 pounds of white sweet potatoes, which was considered good enough. Although nothing major happened in the village after that, there were still many conflicts because of the matter of helping out relatives who were outsiders. However, Zhou didn't take it to heart and just let it pass. On the other hand, Manager Liu found out that the first prince's men were involved through the people who collected the white potatoes. However, he didn't alert anyone. Instead, he asked someone to watch them carefully and see what they were up to. In the blink of an eye, it was Qiu Nyang's son's 1-month-old birthday. Zhou gave 2 pounds of white cotton and a piece of blue cotton cloth to Qiu Nyang. It was just enough to make a small cotton coat for the child. The next step was to harvest the remaining white sweet potatoes. This time, Gu Qingrui and Zhou went together. After collecting everything and leaving enough food for the people in the manor, he dug a cellar and buried the rest with sand, covering them with a layer of wheat straw. 2 days later, at night, Gu Qingye and Gu Qingji came with a cart full of stuff. There were about 300 pounds of sweet potatoes, 200 pounds of radishes, and 200 pounds of cabbage each. There were also 4 to 5 winter melons and pumpkins. Chapter 310 Low-key, push the cart to the back and put it in the cellar. Gu Qingrui brought them to the back of the house and helped put everything in the basement together. After they were done, Gu Qingrui saw 2 jars of about 5 pounds of beef oil in the cellar. He gave them one and said, "Take this beef oil with you. Stewing cabbage with it is delicious." "Sure, thanks," Gu Qingye said as he took it. "By the way, how's the yield of sweet potatoes in its second season?" "To be honest, they're not as plentiful as the ones in the spring. This season's white sweet potatoes didn't lack fertilizer and never lacked water from the beginning to the end. However, they only produced 6,000 pounds per acre." Gu Qingji gave his report. "In any case, indeed, we don't have to worry about going hungry for the next year," Gu Qingye continued. "By the way, are these 300 pounds of white sweet potatoes enough? If they aren't enough, 111 bring more over. Otherwise, you won't be able to buy them in the future, even if you want to." "What do you mean?" Are you guys trying to sell the sweet potatoes? That's right. Storing it at home would attract people's attention. After the third prince stopped accepting them, we gave Zacchaeus' family £500. Constable Tian bought £2,000 for 10 coppers per pound, and we also sold Zhang Qingqing £1,000. I don't even know if one can keep the remaining £5,000. How about this? 111 by £2,000 from you, and you can tell others that you sold all £5,000. This way, you can secretly leave a portion of it behind just in case. You can take it if you want, you don't have to pay. Gu Qingye replied. Gu Qingrui immediately knew it was just a courtesy, as 2,000 pounds of white potatoes were 20 taels of silver. How could they give it away for free? He shook his head and replied, we already have enough for ourselves. These are for Dr. Luo, so we'll just pay according to the normal price. I see. Well, heed your advice, as that'll save us a lot of trouble. Gu Qingye nodded. Gu Qingji didn't object when he heard this. Gu Shi was still an apprentice at the clinic, so no one could say anything about selling it to them. Okay, it's a deal. I'll find 2 carts and go there tomorrow morning. Alright, we'll be going back now. After that, the 2 brothers went home, carrying the beef oil in their carts. After Mrs. Chiao and the others learned that they had brought back a jar of beef oil, they were thrilled. This was especially so for Gu Chengzi's wife, Mrs. Yang. The oil mill had been closed for nearly a year, and the oil reserves at home had been used up. It was fine if the adults didn't have oil for their daily meals, but not the children. By the way, Qingji, she asked, does Qingrui have meat at home? We can buy some from them. I didn't see it. There were only 2 jars of beef oil in their cellar, and he even gave us 1 jar. That's enough. It's good enough to have this jar of oil. Don't be so greedy. They would have given it to us long ago if they really had it. Mrs. Chow said. I heard that there are a lot of cattle and sheep in their manor. It's not like we aren't paying for them. Mrs. Yao said unhappily. She couldn't stand it anymore, let alone her child. Her pants were almost slipping down her waist after not having meat in the past 6 months. Indeed. Can't we buy from them? Mrs. Liu echoed. Let's not talk about this. First, the manor doesn't belong to the couple in the first place. Now that Manager Liu is there, it's not like they can decide that on their own. Moreover, the villagers are all eating plainly. Do you dare fill our house with the fragrance of meat? Won't this attract hatred? It'll be troublesome if you attract thieves. Father Gu reminded them. Indeed, when it's time to be low-key, we must act the part. Didn't you see that they don't even dare to eat meat anymore? Second Uncle Gu chimed in. Right. Speaking of keeping a low profile, Qingrui gave us an idea. At this point, Gu Qingye told them how Gu Qingrui had bought their white sweet potatoes but left some for them secretly. Chapter 3:11 Checking up on everyone. Right, speaking of keeping a low profile, Qingrui gave us an idea. At this point, Gu Qingye told them how Gu Qingrui was planning to falsify the number of potatoes he was buying from them. This is a good idea. These 3,000 pounds of potatoes will be our family's life-saving food if this drought continues. Father Gu nodded in agreement. What do you think, brother? He asked second Uncle Gu. That's a good idea. Let's quickly preserve these white sweet potatoes, so they don't have to be frozen and unfrozen repeatedly. Second Uncle Gu nodded. On the other hand, Gu Qingrui went to the patriarch's house to borrow an ox cart after his brothers left. The next morning, before the sun rose, he took a horse carriage and an ox cart to pull 2 full carts of white sweet potatoes. He went to Gu Qingye and asked him to follow him to his clinic in town. Gu Qingye also took a cart full of white potatoes, gathering 2,000 pounds in total. When Dr. Luo came to the clinic and saw the white sweet potatoes in the courtyard, he looked at Gu Qingrui excitedly and asked, "Qingrui, are these all for me?" "You can say that, but it's from my father's side, so you have to pay 10 coppers per pound. It's only fitting. It's good enough that I'm able to buy some. With these sweet potatoes, I won't have to worry about starving for the next year." Dr. Luo nodded repeatedly and then turned around to give him 20 taels of silver. "Qingrui, thank you. You've really saved our family's life." "You're welcome. You should cart it home as soon as possible to avoid any trouble." "I understand. I'll have to trouble you to keep an eye on the clinic for the morning, then." After Dr. Luo finished speaking, he turned around and went home, getting help to bring the white potatoes along. In the afternoon, Gu Qingrui brought Zhou to town and sent 500 pounds of grass noodles, 1,000 pounds of white sweet potatoes, and a can of butter to the restaurant. Finally, Gu Qingrui pulled another cart full of white potatoes to the clinic and distributed them to the clinic helpers. Except for Gu Qingxi, everyone received 200 pounds. Although it wasn't much, it was enough to last them through the winter if they were to pair it with some other food. On the other side, Zhou stayed in the restaurant after delivering the food. Seeing that everyone was in good spirits and looked good except for losing some weight, she asked, "Zhao Qing, Li Xing, how's the cooking that you've been teaching Qiu Yu and the others? Have they memorized the menu of our restaurant?" "Mistress, don't worry. They're all obedient, and they've all memorized all of our existing recipes. Although they don't have the ingredients to practice, they're the ones who make our 3 meals daily. The soup they make is even better than ours." Zhao Xing reported with a smile. "That's great. Although our restaurant is closed, you can't relax. Otherwise, you'll be out of practice when we open again. One more thing is to learn each other's skills, such as martial arts, reading, accounting, and so on. You're the first batch of people under me, and it'll put you in an important position in the future. However, you'll need to have the ability for me to do that." Zhou paused and looked at Fang Qing, Gu Wen, and Gu Wu. "Especially the 3 of you. You're still young and have a long way to go. Don't stop striving for a better future just because you have food and shelter now. At the very least, you guys must think of a way to protect yourselves right now. Don't worry, mistress. We will definitely work hard and not let you down," Fang Qing stated, puffing out his chest. The others chimed in. Zhou nodded, and she asked, "By the way, Zhao Qing. One heard that some refugees had come to town. Did they cause any trouble?" Chapter 312 Fight. When they first came, some of them weren't honest. They stole and robbed, but most were individual cases. After they were caught, the soldiers sent them directly to the mill, and the rest of the refugees became well-behaved. Besides that, we're still selling grass noodles here, and there's still some water in the town wells. Overall, the town is quite stable. That's great. Don't leak your wealth, you guys should keep a low profile. Don't worry, boss, we'll keep a low profile. Zhou gave them a few more words of advice and checked on Qiu Ye's cooking. After she was done, she left the restaurant and walked around the streets. She found that besides a grocery store and Gu Shengru's clinic, only one official grain store was open with guarded soldiers. She entered the grocery store and found the items were limited. Other than soy sauce, vinegar, salt, baking powder, and alum, there was nothing else food-related. After walking around, she only bought some thick thread to make shoes and went to the clinic. When the sun was about to set, the couple and Gu Qingxi returned to the village. As soon as they entered the village, they were surrounded by a group of people who said, "Dr. Gu, I heard that you bought all the sweet potatoes that the Gu family had just harvested. Is that true?" "Yes, but it's not really me who bought it," as I was just helping Dr. Luo and his workers at the clinic make the purchase. It's not even enough for all of them. At this point, Gu Qingrui asked, "You guys are, we wanted to buy some too. We didn't expect, yeah. There's a shortage of food everywhere now. It's really a worry. Indeed, it's not easy for anyone to survive this year, so it's better to protect yourself." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he pulled on the reins and continued, "You guys go ahead, as well be going back now." When the crowd heard this, they immediately retreated. After muttering a few words of shame, they dispersed. A month passed in the blink of an eye, and the weather gradually turned cold. The village men began climbing the mountain to chop firewood, and at the same time, they were looking for good wood to supply the workshop. While the men were busy in the mountains, the women sat under the sun and made clothes or shoes. Of course, when they were bored, it was common for them to quarrel as they chatted. Therefore, the small group members changed daily, which was more lively than a TV drama series. As for Zhou Ying, she got bored at home, so she also joined in and took it as a form of entertainment. She usually only listened and never talked. She never took the initiative to ask about other people's family matters, let alone talk about her family's problems, so her days were relatively uneventful. One day, while everyone was chatting happily, two people suddenly ran down from the mountain and shouted, "This is bad. They're fighting. Everyone, come and help." "Jushing, what are you shouting about? What do you mean that they're fighting? Who's fighting who?" Mrs. Bai immediately stood up and asked. "That's right. Don't panic and tell us the problem clearly. What's going on?" Sixth Aunt Gu inquired. "Refugees. A lot of refugees suddenly appeared on the mountain. They said they came from the south. Didn't they say there was an epidemic in the south some time ago? We are not allowing them to enter our village because they do not appear to be healthy. Who would have expected that they would start fighting us?" Jiaxing gasped for breath and explained intermittently. "What? That's crossing the line. We can't let them enter the village. Hurry up and inform the village chief and the constable." Mrs. Bai immediately ordered. "Yes, go back home and call all the strong men to the foot of the mountain. We need to stop them from entering the village." Sixth Aunt Gu agreed. As soon as Zhou Ying heard this, she immediately stood up and ran home. First, she went to inform Sister Tian next door, and then she rushed to town with Heir Zhuang. Chapter 313. Heading up the mountains, the first thing they had to do was make sure that the refugees on the mountain weren't diseased. It would be fine if they didn't bring any, but coming into the village was a dead no if they did. Of course, their possibility of carrying this new disease wasn't high. Otherwise, how could they have crossed the mountains and rivers to reach this place? However, they had to be prepared for any possibilities. Gu Qingrui, who was discussing a prescription with Dr. Luo, was startled when he learned of her news. He immediately stood up and said, 111, go get a carriage from the back. Wait for me at the side door. I'll go with you. Dr. Luo declared, too. He said a few words to his apprentice, took his medicine kit, and went to the side door with Zhou Ying. After Gu Qingrui had secured the carriage, they quickly rushed to the village. When they arrived at the village, everyone had already gathered at the foot of the mountains, even soldiers were climbing up the mountains. Seeing this, Gu Qingrui turned his head and said to Dr. Luo, Dr. Luo, you wait at the foot of the mountains, and 111 go up with them. Be careful. Dr. Luo nodded. He knew very well that going up the mountain would only bring them trouble at his age. Gu Qingrui nodded. After handing the horse reins over to Zhou Ying, he immediately went into the carriage, took his medicine kit, and chased after the soldiers. When he reached the front, he realized that not only were the soldiers there but even Tian Jingzhong and the patriarch. He immediately stepped forward, took a deep breath, and said, "Village constable, uncle, try not to get into a conflict with them. I'll see if they are diseased or not." Tian Jingzhong smiled and patted his shoulder. "That's my intention. With you here, we can be at ease. Let's hurry up and head up." Gu Qingrui nodded and followed them. After heading up the mountains, he finally saw the two parties confronting each other. On one side were a group of villagers led by Qian Jiaxi. On the other side were about 1,000 refugees in tattered clothes. Tian Jingzhong exclaimed, "Oh my, the number of people is enough to form a large village." He breathed a sigh of relief because medicinal herbs were in short supply in Qingshui town. If everyone were badly injured, it would be difficult to deal with the following treatments. After that, the group quickly trekked forward. When they arrived, Tian Jingzhong looked at Qian Jiaxi and asked, "Are you guys all right?" "Don't worry, my lord. We're fine, and we just suffered some beatings from wooden sticks. Besides, they're planning to settle down in our area, so they don't dare to cause too much trouble." Tian Jingzhong nodded and went forward. "Who can understand our words? Send a representative over and we'll have a good talk." "Me," someone said. A 6-foot-tall man raised his hand and stood up. At the same time, when the crowd behind them saw Gu Shengru's group of men, they immediately buzzed and murmured with excitement, some even cried with joy. From the looks and clothes of Gu Shengru's group, these refugees knew that although they had suffered from the drought, the situation wasn't serious. The refugees knew they could finally stop and take a rest. Tian Jingzhong waved at the big guy and asked, after he leaned over, "I'm the village constable of Qingshui town. Where did you come from? What kind of disaster did your hometown suffer?" "I'm Hu Chun, and I used to be a bodyguard. Our group came from the Hui province and passed through the Qi mountain." Hu Chun paused and explained, "When our hometown was flooded, we hid in the mountains. After that, because our refuge spot was far away and our village was destroyed, everyone from nearby villages decided to go up the mountains after some discussion." "Several villages. There must be many who didn't make it along the way, right?" Tian Jingzhong's eyes swept over everyone as he spoke with a heavy expression. "Right, only 1/3 of us are left." Hu Chun replied with a heavy nod. Chapter 314 Going down the mountains, treating illnesses. Are you all sure you want to stay in this area? Yes, it's too cold here. We'll probably die here in the cold wilderness if we don't go down the mountains now. Alright, just in case, I'll have to let the doctor check you all and ensure there's no disease before one can take you in. You can discuss it among yourselves. If you agree, then line up and wait for the doctor to examine you one by one. If you disagree, you can only go back into the mountains again." Hu Chun didn't feel anything was wrong when he heard this. Instead, he admired Tian Jingzhong very much, as only an official who took human lives seriously was a good one. Moreover, they had been in the mountains for nearly 3 months. Who knew if they were sick? It was a good opportunity to have a checkup done. Those who were sick could be diagnosed early, and those who weren't could have peace of mind. After a discussion with a few elders, everyone quickly lined up. Seeing this, Gu Qingrui called out the 2 brothers, Qian Jiaxi and Qian Jiala. He took out 3 masks from the first aid kit that Zhou had added extra padding to and put them on. Gu Qingrui then asked the 2 brothers to use a pair of pliers to hold the cotton ball and disinfect the refugees' wrists while he took their pulses. Those with a cold sat on one side, while those with other illnesses sat on the other. Fortunately, no serious epidemic diseases were detected, but most suffered from a bad cold. Some were mild, while others were more serious. The serious ones had already gone delirious with a fever. After disinfecting his hand with medical alcohol, Gu Qingrui told Tian Jingzhong about the situation. They can go down the mountains but shouldn't stay with the others for now. We can only let them mix after their illnesses are over. Is the medicine in your clinic enough for them? It should be enough. If it isn't, we can only use folk prescriptions for the not-so-serious ones. Alright, let's go down the mountains. After Tian Jingzhong finished speaking, he informed Hu Chun, and everyone was divided into 2 teams as they went down the mountain. However, they were not allowed to enter the village. They were instead asked to borrow a few large tents from the military camp and stay in an open space. As for the beds, Gu Qingrui gathered batches of straw and sterilized them. The blankets were either taken from richer families or the military. They ate mainly the food they brought and the noodles they bought with their collective money. On the other end, after Gu Qingrui went down the mountain, he took out the medicinal herbs in the house and asked the village chief to bring all the clay pots and medicine jars into the village. Dr. Luo directed everyone to start brewing the medicine. Meanwhile, he brought the blood of the most seriously ill person into the interspace and tested it. After confirming that it carried some virus, he immediately went to the clinic to get the medicine and change the prescription. It was already nighttime after his busy day. Zhou looked at his tired face and said, "Hurry up and eat your dinner, then go to bed early." "No, I'm not clean. I'd better go into the interspace to clean my clothes and take a hot shower." Gu Qingrui shook his head. The flu was no joke, and he didn't want to infect her. "That's true." Zhou closed the door and let go of Zhuang. Then, she took him into her interspace. After disinfecting his clothes, she threw them in the washing machine. She washed her hands, went out of her interspace, and brought in the dinner she had cooked. Finally, she used a pressure cooker to cook a pot of white fungus and lotus seed soup. After Gu Qingrui finished cleaning up, the white fungus and lotus seed soup was also ready. After the 2 of them had a comfortable meal, Zhou said, "You should go to bed early. I'll take care of the animals in the space." Chapter 3:15 Settling Down. 1. I'd better go out and sleep. They'll definitely come to me if there's an emergency at night. Alright, you go ahead and sleep first. Zhou sent him out and returned to her interspace to get busy. After she was done, she used the pressure cooker to boil another pot of beef soup. The next morning, the 2 ate beef noodles in the interspace. Gu Qingrui went out to work after he finished breakfast. As soon as Zhou finished washing the dishes, villagers began to visit one after another, mainly to inquire about the condition of the refugees. After Zhou heard this, to avoid causing panic, she only told them that the group of people had a serious case of the flu and asked them not to come if there was nothing important. After that, she didn't say anything else. This time, the villagers were obedient, and no one came to bother her again except for the village chief. 3 days later, the refugees' conditions improved. Those who were only mildly ill had mostly recovered and were under their care. Gu Qingrui only had to stay behind occasionally to prescribe medicine and treat their illnesses. 7 days later, all of them recovered except those who were seriously ill. Half a month later, all the refugees had completely recovered. Tian Jingzhong then found Hu Chun and the other refugees' elders and asked, "What are your plans? Do you want to return to your hometown after the flood, or do you want to live in Qingshui town for a longer time?" Hu Chun's eyes immediately lit up. Qingshui town, in Yunhe County, was a famous place. It could be said to be a transfer station for the Ming dynasty's river transportation. The prosperity of this place was great, and it would be best if they could stay. However, if they didn't have a house or land in this disastrous year, they wouldn't have a good time either. "Are there any suitable houses and lands for us?" he asked. "No, even if there are empty houses in the village, there are very few, and they are dilapidated. However, if you want to build houses, you may be granted land for housing in each village." As for the land, it's just a barren land. You can also buy land from the locals. Tian Jingzhong added. He paused for a moment and continued, the tents are yours. Of course, if you're afraid of the cold, you can also live in the warehouse at the dock, where there are also a group of refugees from other places. As for job placements, you all know what the current year is like. I'm afraid it's only to help people carry water and cut wood. Can we discuss this? I'll give you a clear answer tomorrow. Alright. By the way, if you want to be distributed to different villages, you'll have to split up. Or you could form a village at the foot of the mountains. It's up to you. As soon as he finished speaking, an old man hurriedly asked, can we really form a village by ourselves? If outsiders like them were to be scattered and spread out in the various villages, they would be easily bullied. However, if they were to form a separate village, it would be different. Although they would suffer in the early stages, they could live a good life after 5 or 6 years. The key was that everyone would be more united after supporting each other along the way. Of course, but the land is barren. After Tian Jingzhong finished speaking, he pointed at the mountains and said, go southwest along the foot of the mountain, and there's a village there, and further west of the village is a large open space. However, there are a lot of rocks and thistles over there, and it's hard to clear them, so we haven't been able to distribute them. I understand. Well, study it carefully and give you a reply tomorrow. The old man nodded. Alright, after you've discussed it, you can come to the village to find the village chief. He will take you to me. After Tian Jingzhong finished speaking, he turned and left. Chapter 316 Settling Down, 2. After Tian Jingzhong left, another old man, Hu Chun's uncle, asked, "HM, it seems like you all want to stay." "Uncle, I want to stay. If we go back to that little mountain valley, we'll still have to start again anyway. The only good thing is the land we own, but who knows what it'll be like after the flood. But it's different here, this is the river transportation channel, and there are plenty of opportunities. As long as we work hard, we don't have to worry about being unable to settle down." Hu Chun gave his reasons. Indeed. The problem is that it's too far to go back, too. There's a drought in the north and floods in the south. But how long can we last with the silver in our hands? Most importantly, I'm afraid one can't work much with my old bones. The old man who spoke first sighed. Then let's go to the place Constable Tian mentioned first. If it really doesn't work out, we'll try to settle in a few other villages. Uncle Hu was dejected when he heard that. The group followed Tian Jingzhong's guidance and found the place he mentioned. To put it bluntly, it was a small valley surrounded on both sides by mountains in the southwest. The ground was as barren as Constable Tian had said, with many rocks and shrubs. However, the area was quite large, with an area of about 1,000 acres. It would definitely be enough for 1,000 people to live if it were developed. These people had grown up in the mountains, so they didn't mind. Instead, they felt a sense of closeness. They each found a stick and walked in to check around. They focused on the shrubs growing on the ground and the grass. If they could plant something, they would be able to stay no matter what they planted. 2 hours later, the group returned to their original spot. One of the old men took out a thorny branch and said, "I have most of these plants over there. There's also grass and some wild vegetables." Same here. There are quite a few jujube trees on the southern hill, and they can be considered medicinal herbs. It's the same on our side. We also have many of these spiky things. There are more spiky shrubs on the West Mountains, and many of them. Hu Chun quipped in. "If I'm not wrong, it's a type of flower," he added after a moment of hesitation. "Flower?" "Yes, it looks like the moon rose, but it doesn't look like it at the same time. There are many fine thorns on the edges of the leaves. Hu Chun stated as he returned his gaze to the branch. Let's go back and ask. If this is valuable, let's change our plan to planting flowers. It just so happens that old Lin here has worked in a rich family's flower garden before. Sure, let's ask Dr. Gu then. He's a doctor, and he might recognize this thing. Hu Chun said. Let's go. After that, the group returned to the village. Hu Chun found the Gu family house after some time. However, as soon as he reached the door, he immediately retreated when he heard a dog barking. Gu Qingrui, who was squeezing pickled vegetables with Zhou Ying in the courtyard, looked up and was stunned when he saw him. He went up to Zhuang and held him, saying, Brother Hu, you're here. Let's talk inside. It's okay, it's just a matter of a few words. I won't go in and disturb you. Hu Chun glanced at Zhou Ying, who was busy, and shook his head. Gu Qingrui had no choice but to walk out. Hu Chun directly handed the branch to him and said, Dr. Gu, do you know what this is? Gu Qingrui took it and observed it carefully before saying, This is a type of wild rose. Where did you pick it from? Hu Chun didn't hide anything after hearing this. He told him everything that had happened since Tian Jingzhong came to find them. He asked, Have you seen this flower before? Can it be sold for money? Chapter 3:17 Settling Down. 3. You probably can't sell it as a flower, but a wild rose is also a medicinal herb. First, it could heal wounds and eliminate fatigue. Secondly, it had the effect of regulating body temperature and replenishing blood. It could also play a role in maintaining beauty. Third, it can regulate meridians and relieve pain. It also improves your bladder and reduces gastrointestinal diseases. It has a good effect on relieving constipation. The most important thing is that it can be drunk as a tea, just like chrysanthemums. Tea. Hu Chun's eyes lit up upon hearing this. It was said that chrysanthemums were considered high-class tea. Although this rose tea wasn't as expensive, it was much better than farming crops. Thinking of this, he got a little excited. Dr. Gu, please don't tell anyone about this, he pleaded. Gu Qingrui was stunned for a moment before he knew what he was thinking. He said, Sure, but if you want to sell these roses at a high price, you have to farm at scale like chrysanthemums. So after you settle down, it's best to work together with the others. Otherwise, you won't be able to defend your secret and develop well. When Hu Chun heard him say this, he nodded repeatedly and replied, I understand. Thank you for your reminder. We won't hide anything deliberately. Okay. One can buy them from you if you can't farm much early on. It'll also tell you how to process it. Thank you so much. I'll head back for now. Hu Chun bowed before turning around and running down the mountain. After Gu Qingrui saw him off, he turned around and washed his hands. He then continued squeezing pickled vegetables together with Zhou Ying. At the same time, he said, This is their destiny. We've been walking around the mountains for so long and didn't even see a patch of wild roses. That's right. But it's good that they're planning on planting it. We can just go over and collect them, which will save us a lot of trouble. You're right. Gu Qingrui agreed, and the two of them got busy. On the other end, after Hu Chun returned, he found a few elders and explained the use of wild roses to them. What do you guys think? Regardless, one want to stay. If that's the case, then we'll stay. Uncle Hu agreed. The others also echoed one after another. After that, they asked for everyone's opinion. Of course, he didn't tell them about the wild rose. Otherwise, they wouldn't know if the news would spread, and they would have no specialty in the local area. Everyone naturally agreed, as this was much better than staying in a small mountain village. So, the next morning, they found Tian Jingzhong through the village chief and told him about their settlement. Tian Jingzhong was a little surprised after hearing this. After all, that place was really barren, so he asked again, "Are you sure?" "We're sure. We've gone to take a look. Although the land is a little barren, it can be farmed. It's just a little more difficult to get started. There are also many jujube trees on the mountain to the south. We can earn some silver by taking care of them." "Alright, since you've decided, come with me to the county office and settle the procedures for forming a village," said Tian Jingzhong. "By the way, you'll have to decide who will be the village chief." The elders pointed at Hu Chun. Firstly, he could communicate with the locals normally. Another reason was that he had been a good leader and had a good reputation. In addition, he was young and daring. With him leading the group, they wouldn't be afraid of a lack of decision-making in the future. Hu Chun was stunned for a moment, but he didn't decline. He nodded directly. Tian Jingzhong smiled and patted his shoulder. "Kiddo, it seems like you're pretty popular here. Are you literate? Although a village chief's position isn't that high up the ranks, you'll still need to write documents to convey reports to the higher-ups." Chapter 3:18 Marriage. I'm not too good at it, but I've studied for a few years. However, after one passed the exam, my family was too poor, so I changed to practicing martial arts and became an armed bodyguard. No wonder you could speak your words clearly. Then it's settled. I'll change my clothes, and well set off. After Tian Jingzhong finished speaking, he turned and returned to his inner room. The village chief turned his head. "Congratulations, Brother Hu. Our two villages are quite close to each other, so we'll have to look out for each other in the future. I don't deserve to be called brother, I'll call you Uncle Qian. Please take care of me in the future, Uncle Qian." "Ha, don't mind if I accept being your elder, then. If you need any help in the future, don't hesitate to ask. I'll definitely help if I can." At this time, Tian Jingzhong changed into clean clothes and came out. The few of them exchanged a few polite words and then parted ways. Early the next morning, Hu Chun and the others got busy. A group of strong laborers took their hatchets and began to clear the barren land. The village layout was formed into an L shape, almost entirely wrapping the rose garden. After the weeds were cleared out, it was time to dig a well. The elderly went to town to find a cloth shop and bought some cloth to make cotton-padded clothes for the winter. At the same time, the news that Hu Chun had become the village chief as a young man had gradually spread in the village. Just as Zhou was about to have dinner that night, Father Gu came in looking disheveled. His face appeared to have been scratched several times. Gu Qingrui was stunned for a moment. Please treat my wound first," Father Gu requested in embarrassment. "Sit down and wait for a moment." Gu Qingrui didn't ask further. But when he turned around, he almost laughed out loud. To be honest, even when their family was escorted back here, Father Gu had never been in such a sorry state, even when his pride was wounded. Gu Qingrui never thought his father would be this badly scratched one day. Without even thinking, he knew it was most likely Mrs. Liu's doing, but he didn't know why. At the same time, he was secretly smirking. In the past, Father Gu always treasured her and her kids. He even made Gu Qingrui and Zhou leave the family with nothing but the clothes on their backs to please Mrs. Liu. He was getting his retribution, and he deserved it. Zhou just lightly greeted him before returning to the kitchen. She put away the steamed sea bass she had prepared and made a small pot of cooked pork with cabbage and vermicelli. She served them with a plate of sweet and sour radish, 3 salted duck eggs, and 6 black steamed buns. When she returned to the dining room, Gu Qingrui had already treated his wound. Zhou placed the dishes on the table and said, "Father, sit down, and let's have a meal." Yes, yes, do take a seat and eat with us. Gu Qingrui nodded and even brought him a stool. Father Gu wanted to refuse at first. After all, no family is well off these days. But thinking of the crazy Mrs. Lu and smelling the lovely food before him, he finally nodded. Ah, don't mind if I do. He picked up his chopsticks and found some vermicelli inside. He asked, "Is this vermicelli?" "It doesn't look like it." "This is vermicelli but made with white potato flour. It has a different flavor. Try it," Gu Qingrui said. Father Gus' interest was piqued when he heard it was made from white sweet potatoes. To be honest, he was getting tired of eating potatoes every day. It would be best if he could have a change of flavor. He picked up some vermicelli with his chopsticks and ate it. He nodded and said, not bad at all. It's bouncy and soft and more delicious than regular vermicelli. When it's soaked in meat juice, it doesn't taste inferior to actual meat. If you like it, eat more. There's such a big pot. There are steamed buns over here if you think it's too salty. Gu Qingrui handed him a black steamed bun after that. Oh, you guys go ahead and eat too. Don't mind me. I won't hesitate to try them. After Father Gu finished speaking, he lowered his head and started eating. Chapter 3:19 Disciplining the daughter-in-law after the meal, Showing made them a pot of tea and went to the kitchen to wash the dishes. You've been in contact with the refugees for quite some time. What do you think of Hu Chun? Father Gu asked. In what aspect? Gu Qingrui asked, surprised by the sudden question. Both. Tell me the details. He's not bad. He's bold but meticulous, aggressive, and knows when to advance and when to retreat. Phi also has a wide range of knowledge. He's handsome and tall and looks like a good man at the moment. When Gu Qingrui said this, he thought of the wound on his father's face and asked, You can't be thinking of marrying my fifth sister to him, right? Cough, one did have this idea, but Mrs. Lu disdained their family for being poor and didn't agree to this marriage. She didn't even consider our family's current status as criminals. As long as the groom's family's condition is decent, how many would be willing to marry her? Gu Qingrui looked at him in surprise. To be honest, he was pretty impressed with his line of thought. Hu Chun was skilled in both literature and martial arts. If he had the chance, he would definitely be able to achieve something. What do the other people in the family think? He asked. Your grandma and your second uncle both agree with me. Qingji and Qingye didn't object, either. It's just that Mrs. Lu refused to agree no matter what and insisted that I wanted to harm Zishan. She's my biological daughter, so why would I? When Father Gu said this, he remembered how he had kicked the couple out of the house and suddenly reddened. Gu Qingrui understood what he meant. However, the damage had already been done, and he didn't want to hear his repentance. Hence, he changed the topic. What about Zishan? Doesn't this depend on her opinion? What does she know? As long as we adults make the decision, it's fine. It's a major event in her life. It's better to ask her about it so there won't be a knot in her heart in the future. That's true. I'll ask her for her opinion later. Father Gu nodded. After chatting for a while, the sky outside got completely dark. After Father Gu asked about how to make the vermicelli, he got up and went home. After Zhouing learned the whole story, she shook her head and said, What a huge difference between a child with a mother and a child without one. I feel so sorry for our original selves. Indeed, in ancient times, although it was said that the mother would be prosperous because of their son, in most cases, it's the other way around. But this has nothing to do with us. Well, try not to get involved in the matters over there and just focus on living our own lives. On the other side, after Father Gu returned home, he saw the crowd waiting for him to eat and Mrs. Lu kneeling on the ground. He was stunned for a moment before saying, "You guys can start eating. I've already eaten at Shengru's place. You've sure become capable, even learning how to find a meal outside, huh?" Mrs. Lu got up and angrily said this as she moved the dining table. Kneeling for just 2 hours seems useless. Do you want to kneel for another 2 hours? Madame Chow chimed in with a strange tone. Mother, everyone was waiting for him, but Mrs. Lu immediately lowered her head and replied. Madame Chow, however, knocked the ground with her walking stick and interrupted her halfway through. After that, she firmly demanded, "Why aren't you listening to me anymore? Are you planning to rebel? Or do you think you can be arrogant after becoming the main wife? Do you want to be demoted back to being a concubine and experience what it means to have someone above you again?" Gu Qingye immediately turned to his father for help. However, Father Gu ignored him. It was only suitable for a mother-in-law to teach her daughter-in-law. There was no need for him to stop her. What's more, Mrs. Lu was getting more and more arrogant. She even dared to get physical with him. For Gu Qingye's sake, it was already good enough that he didn't personally deal with her. Thus, why would he stop his mother from venting her anger on his behalf? He wanted Mrs. Lu to learn a good lesson this time and let her know what it meant to regard her husband as the central pillar of the family. Chapter 320 Seeking Opinions. Mrs. Liu's heart skipped a beat when she heard this. In these 2 years, she had been bugging Mrs. Guo a lot. Her life would be difficult if she were demoted to a concubine. At the thought of this, she quickly kneeled and apologized. "Mother, one only muddled because of Zishan's marriage. Don't take it to heart. I won't dare do it again." Gu Zishan immediately went forward and shook Madame Chow's arm, acting coquettishly. "Grandma, for the sake of your granddaughter, please give my mother another chance." "That's right. Grandma, please give my mother another chance. She definitely won't dare do it again." Gu Qingye quickly echoed. Seeing this, Madame Chow snorted coldly and said, "For the sake of the 2 children, I will give you one last chance. If you do it again, you can return to being a concubine. Maybe when your status is lower, you'll be able to see better." "No, I definitely won't do this again." Mrs. Lu hurriedly nodded. As the saying goes, it's easy to avoid the death penalty, but it's hard to escape punishment. You'll switch places with Mrs. Guo and cook a month's worth of meals as a punishment. Even if Mrs. Lu was internally unhappy, she nodded and said, "One will remember this." Quickly set the table. When Mrs. Lu heard this, she immediately turned around and went out. The others had seen enough of the show and immediately followed to prepare the dishes. "Son, the wound on your face won't leave a scar, right?" Madame Chow looked at Father Gu. "It's fine." Qingrui said that the wound wasn't deep. After it's healed, it'll be fine after applying a month's worth of scar removal cream. "That's good. She's really too much, getting more and more outrageous. You can't spoil her anymore." "I know." When Father Gu said this, he told her about the vermicelli. "Mother, brother, I'm thinking of using a portion of the white sweet potato to make vermicelli or turn it into dry powder. Those 2 things can be dried and stored for a long time. One heard it wouldn't be a problem to keep them for 2 or 3 years. What do you think?" After that, he briefly explained how to make vermicelli from white sweet potatoes. "You 2 brothers can discuss it, I'll go and eat dinner." Madame Chow got up and sat at the dining table. Second Uncle Gu hesitated for a moment before saying, "Brother, from what you've said, if we were to turn white sweet potatoes into vermicelli, some parts might be wasted. Let's take out 500 pounds of white sweet potatoes and try it out before anything." "All right, let's give it a try." After the meal, Father Gu called Gu Qingye and Gu Zishan to the study room. Now that there are no outsiders, you can tell me what you think of Hu Chun. Is there a need for this marriage? If there isn't, I won't waste my breath anymore. I think Hu Chun is a good person. As long as nothing unexpected happens, his future will be fine. However, one heard he has a pair of younger siblings, and their family conditions are poor now. So, it all depends on what Zishan thinks. If she would be willing to go through 2 years of suffering together and bet on a good man for a good life, she should marry him. Otherwise, it isn't like she doesn't have another choice. Father Gu looked at Gu Zishan and asked, Zishan, what about you? What do you think? But one must make it clear in advance, don't be too ambitious. Our family situation isn't really better compared to an ordinary farmer's. At most, you can get married to a son from a rich family like Ziki's husband, who doesn't have great ambitions. When Gu Zishan said this, she raised her head and hesitated, asking, Father, is Hu Chun really as good as you say? He's better than the other villagers anyway. At least he's literate and skilled in martial arts. He's also in charge of about 1,000 people now. Father Gu said. As for Hu Chun's character, he had already repeated it more than 10 times and was too lazy to say more. Chapter 321 Meeting. I want to look at him from afar and see if one like him, Gu Zishan replied, raising her head. Father Gu knew that his daughter prioritized how someone looked, so he nodded and said, that's not a problem. You can change into coarse clothes tomorrow and let your brother bring you up the mountain to chop firewood. Just pass by their place, and you will see him. All right, then leave this to me. Gu Qingye nodded in agreement. The next morning, the brother and sister pushed a cart out of the house. However, they did not go there right away. Instead, they went to the mountain between their village and the manor to chop firewood. Of course, it was mainly Gu Qingye who did the cutting, while Gu Zilin helped to clean up. When they needed to rest, they walked over to one side. After looking around, Gu Qingye walked to Hu Chun and greeted him, Brother Hu, you guys are really fast at chopping down firewood. Oh, Brother Qingye. Yeah, we have to hurry. We'll freeze if we don't have a house to live in before winter. Hu Chun replied, wiping away his sweat with the towel on his neck. Oh, right. What kind of house are you guys planning to build? Brick or mud? 2 days ago, one went to the kiln yard and settled on building a brick house with the bricks they have. It'll be faster this way. Oh, are you guys collecting firewood? Hu Chun asked. Yeah, there's basically no firewood on the mountain over there, so we came here. It's a pity that the situation here isn't that great either. We only found some shrubs and withered grass. Indeed, but it's lucky that the trees here weren't completely peeled off. That's true. One won't disturb you if you're busy. If you need our help, just let us know. Don't worry. When the construction of our village starts, 111 definitely ask for your help. Hu Chun said. Gu Qingye nodded. He took another glance at the place before he turned around and left. At the same time, Gu Zishan sized Hu Chun up seriously while standing not far away. He was pretty tall and strong, but he was tan. However, his facial features were quite good-looking, especially his pair of eyes that shone exceptionally bright. He also had a row of white teeth and clean, neat hair. One look and you could tell he was a person who loved cleanliness. In addition, his capabilities were good, so she wasn't repulsed by him. Hu Chun naturally noticed Gu Zishan standing nearby like a still painting. However, he only took a curious glance at her before looking away. Gu Qingye and his sister didn't stay long after they had achieved their goal. They hurried home, pulling the small cart loaded with firewood. How is he? Gu Qingye turned his head and asked his sister. Overall, he's not bad, right? He's fine, Gu Zishan said, nodding. You should seriously consider it. Getting married to him is not going to be an easy life for the next 2 years. You have to think about this clearly. Don't complain to father and me when you regret it. Yeah. Gu Zishan blushed and responded, but she did not say anything else. Conversely, Showing knew Father Gu had taken a fancy to Flu Chun as his future son-in-law through Gu Qingrui. One morning, she was sitting outside, basking in the sun. She was making cotton shoes and listening to the women gossip around her. When she heard someone mention Hu Chun, she perked up her ears to listen. Only then did she realize that many people were eyeing Hu Chun. 2 of them were the most obvious. One was Zhang Qingqing's mother, Aunt Zhang. There was also a sister from the Gu clan. It seemed that she was asking for her sister's sake. Zhou knew that Hu Chun had become a hotcake. She just didn't know who would be the winner in this race for him. After dinner, Zhou told Gu Qingrui about the matter and asked curiously, "Do you think Hu Chun will be interested in Zishan?" "I don't care, as long as you don't fall for him." Gu Qingrui grabbed her hand after he finished. Chapter 322 Giving Up, that depends on whether you're obedient or not. Zhou rolled her eyes at him. "What are you saying? When did one not listen to you, huh?" Gu Qingrui threw her onto the brick bed after that. Zhou was surprised by that. After feeling his hot breath, she reached out her finger and touched his chin, smiling. "Get up, you." "Yes, madam." Gu Qingrui smiled and quickly kissed her on the lips. He turned over and asked, "What do you think? Am I obedient enough?" "You and your words." Zhou replied in a huff. She sat up and said, "By the way, make some more moisturizer later. Many people have been asking about it over the past 2 days. I plan to sell it to them for 50 coppers each." "Not bad. One didn't expect you to build a business from home." Gu Qingrui exclaimed in surprise. "I can't help it, my skin looks too good, after all." After Zhou finished speaking with a proud face, she added with a serious tone, "But, really, you can also sell them in your clinic. Let's wait. It's not easy to buy raw materials during this bad year, especially oil. It'll be hard to explain if we make too much. Alright, prepare 100 boxes for me first. I'll sell them slowly." "No problem," Gu Qingrui said, assuring her. The 2 of them waited for a while. After making sure no one was coming over, the couple locked up and entered the interspace. On the other hand, Gu Zishan went to the study room after dinner to find her father. "Father, can you ask around to see if Hu Chun doesn't have any bad habits? 111 marry him if he doesn't." Mrs. Liu, who had been chasing after Gu Zishan, heard her answer and immediately stepped into the room to criticize her. "Zishan, you're crazy. You've never even cooked a meal before. Are you sure you can handle a heavy life? It's a life full of bitterness, and you might not even have a next meal. Shut up. You and your short-sightedness." Father Gu looked at her with disgust. He looked at Gu Zishan. "But your mother is right about one thing. You've never cooked before, and that's not good. So from tomorrow on, you'll go to the kitchen and learn how to cook. No matter who you marry in the future, you'll have to learn this." "I understand, father." Gu Zishan nodded. But, Mrs. Liu had just opened her mouth when Gu Zishan interrupted her. "Father, you must be busy. We'll be leaving now." After she finished speaking, she pulled her mother out. "Mother, I know you are doing this for my good, but you should know about our family's current situation. It is difficult to marry into a good family. Hu Chun's current conditions aren't good, but he has the potential and ability. Have you forgotten about those girls that wait under the results panel when it's time to announce the scholars' examination results? How many young ladies from official families marry poor scholars for the sake of their future? After missing Hu Chun, there might really be no other suitable one. She then stammered, "I don't want to be someone else's concubine." After Mrs. Liu heard it, she was startled. She smiled bitterly and didn't speak again. She knew the pain of being a concubine. Back then, if it weren't for the fact that Princess Ping Yang fell into an ice hole when she was young, which injured her body and caused her to be unable to give birth, Mrs. Liu might not even be worthy of conceiving a child for the Gu family. When she gave birth to Gu Qingye, if she hadn't been careful and called Father Gu to come back in time, she would have been told to leave her child and exit the family. So she wouldn't let her daughter be a concubine. With their criminal record, it was also difficult for her to find a good family to marry her daughter off to properly. Otherwise, Qingye wouldn't still be single. In comparison, Hu Chun was a good choice as a young village chief. However, the Hu family was too poor, and all their savings had probably been used up after building their house. How were they going to survive? Would they be drinking flour paste every day for the following few years? 963. Chapter 323 Checking him out. 1. The issue was that they hadn't even a proper betrothal gift. Wasn't this an embarrassment waiting to happen? Seeing that Mrs. Liu went silent for a long time, Gu Zishan quickly nudged her and said, "Mother, if Hu Chun doesn't have any bad habits, please don't stop me." Mrs. Liu saw that her attitude was firm, so she didn't try to persuade her anymore. Instead, she pointed to her head and said, You'll regret this one day." She paused for a moment. "No, we can't just let you go like this. One have to talk to your father. I'll ask him to give you some white potatoes as your dowry." Gu Zishan immediately pulled her back when she heard that. "Mother, what are you so anxious for? We haven't even approached him for the marriage. At least, wait until the engagement is settled." Mrs. Liu was stunned for a moment and nodded. She then turned around and left with Gu Zishan. When Father Gu saw they had left, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. He then got up and went to the village chief's house. He would be preparing some food and wine and asking the village chief to invite Hu Chun over to inquire about his preferences. The village chief looked at him in surprise and said, "One didn't expect you to take a fancy to that kid. But you have to consider this clearly. They came from far away, and we don't know their roots. It will be troublesome if there are any problems in the future. I saw value in him as a person. That kid's eyes are clear and bright, he's not a bad person." "That's true. It just so happens that they need wood to build a house. How about we invite him over about this? You can talk to him when the time comes." "Sure, I'll leave this matter to you, Uncle Qian." Father Gu paused and added, "From your words, it seems that someone had also taken a fancy to Hu Chun. Did someone ask you about it?" "I heard from Jiaxi that many people in the village are asking about him." "I see. I'll have to trouble you to invite him over." "No problem, I will ask some questions for you too." 3 days later, after the foundation of the new village was cleared, the brick factory began transporting bricks over. Hu Chun finally found the village chief to discuss buying wood. After the village chief made an appointment for him to check out their inventory and talk in detail that night, he immediately asked Qian Jiaxi to send a letter to Father Gu. After Father Gu received the news, he took a pound of cured meat and went to Widow Hua's home to buy a fat rooster. He also carried a large jar of wine and called the patriarch to go to the village head's house together. When the village chief saw the thing in Father Gu's hand, he exclaimed, "Whoa! You've really put in a lot of money." "Not really. If you want to treat someone, you have to do it sincerely. We can't let them look down on us." Father Goose said with a smile. True that. Come in and take a seat. After the village chief finished speaking, he called Mrs. Bai over and asked her to cook the food Father Gu had brought. By the time Hu Chun arrived, the courtyard was smelling with the smell of cooking meat. After entering the house, the village chief saw that Hu Chun had changed into a new set of clothes and looked much more energetic. He teased, "Young man, you're sure getting more and more energetic. Come, sit down and have a cup of tea." "Thank you, Uncle Chien." Hu Chun sat down at the square table after he finished speaking. "I heard you plan to build brick houses in the village?" the village chief asked. "Indeed. The bricks in the kiln yard are now 1 copper for 2 bricks. I think it's quite affordable, so one ordered to build brick houses. It also allows us to build faster than a mud house." Hu Chun explained. "There's such a good thing. Last year, it was 3 coppers for 2 bricks. The patriarch exclaimed in surprise. "Maybe no one's buying it now." "That's true. Everyone wants to clear their stock while they can. By the way, one have gone over to the wood workshop to take a look. Rafters are fine, but wooden beams might not be enough. Especially the central pillar, we still lack half of what you need." Chapter 324 Checking him out. 2. If there's such a scarcity of wood, are there any places nearby where one can get more? Hu Chun inquired, frowning. There was one in town, but they cleared out the warehouse and moved south last spring. "If it's really urgent," the village chief said, pausing for a moment before continuing, "each family should build the north side of their house first and make do with it until next spring. That appears to be the only option. Also, I'm curious how carpenter wages are calculated. It's fine if you just pay for the wood. For the carpenters, lunch will suffice. I really appreciate it. However, one still need to bother you to help me find workers to build my house. The more, the better, and the quicker it can be finished." The patriarch was pointed out by the village chief, who laughed. "I know, and you'll have to look for the Gu clan's patriarch. The Gu clan has the most people in the village. I'll leave it up to you, Uncle Gu." Hu Chun stated this. "Oh, you're referring to the wrong seniority. After all, someone my age refers to the village chief as Uncle Chien." Father Gu purposefully made things difficult for him. Hu Chun was taken aback for a moment before laughing awkwardly and scratching his head. "I've certainly embarrassed myself. From now on, I'll refer to the village chief as Grandpa Chien." However, aside from a slight blush, he did not appear afraid or embarrassed. Father Gu was content with this. At the very least, Hu Chun's mind was quick. "It's just a different way of addressing me, anything goes." With a smile, the village chief said. The patriarch was aware of Father Gus' purpose and did not make things difficult for him. "The patrol team cannot be lent out, so we can only send 40 to 50 strong laborers," he explained. "As for the salary, it will be 15 copper coins per person per day or a lunch meal. I'll take care of their meals, but the food may not be up to their standards," Hu Chun expressed his concern. "It's fine as long as they have enough to eat this year. There is nothing to complain about," the patriarch answered. "Also, I'm not sure if you can help me ask around. I was wondering who would be willing to sell us some white sweet potatoes. Otherwise, I'm afraid no one could survive on noodles and water every day." "I can ask, but one can't guarantee that you'll be able to buy any," the village chief replied, his face troubled. "Because someone came to the village before you to collect a bunch." "Indeed. There weren't many left at the time. All you can do is try," the patriarch concluded. "Well, take whatever you have." Hu Chun didn't seem surprised when he heard this. "In fact, if you have any extra silver, you should look for Gu Qingrui and his wife. They can make decisions in a manner in the middle of our village. There are a lot of cattle and sheep raised there. Despite the fact that meat is more expensive than sweet potatoes, it can still fill you up. The patriarch probed on. I'll go over and ask. I'll be leaving the labor gathering in your hands, then. Hu Chun said with an embarrassing smile. Okay, I'll notify them tomorrow. According to the patriarch. The food and wine were soon served. The village chief and patriarch began to inquire about Hu Chun's specific situation as soon as the wine was served. They discovered that their group was made up of villagers from more than 10 villages. Only about 1,000 people remained from the original 5,000. As a result, the majority of the silver owned by these 1,000 people previously belonged to others. This was also why they could gather enough money to build houses. They then inquired about his personal situation. He had a fiancée whose life and death was unknown, in addition to the sister-in-law they knew about. What? For a brief moment, the village chief was astonished. This is a big deal. Will you be separated if you don't return? I can only say that we weren't fated to meet. Hu Chun responded vaguely. The three saw his distress and were too embarrassed to inquire further. Chapter 325 Checking him out. 3. You say you have no regrets, but what if she approaches you after you marry? Father Gu inquired. This was not the first time something like this had occurred. Most people would take the fiancé's side and downgrade the man's wife to an equal wife or concubine if he didn't have a firm attitude. So, if he doesn't have a clear attitude, this marriage won't work. Hu Chun was taken aback for a brief moment after hearing this. Then he remembered what they had discussed that night and reacted quickly. They were most likely not simply inquiring about his situation but were also attempting to match him with a girl. Given his current circumstances, he should look for a wife. Not only would his family be at ease with another woman helping out, but they would also be able to better integrate into the local village. After a brief pause, he responded, I'm not going to keep it from you. My grandmother arranged this marriage for me when one had just finished the scholar's exam. However, my parents passed away one after another, so one gave up on the scholar's examination and went to support my family. So, aside from my grandmother, no one acknowledged this marriage. I'm afraid it's even more difficult now that we're separated by distance. This year marks your 23rd birthday. What is the girl's age? You've been keeping her waiting all this time. The village chief asked. I was 12 years old, and she was 5 when we got engaged. As my grandmother put it, there's a reason for our large age difference. It would have been a good time to marry after I had focused on my studies for a few years. Your grandmother has good foresight. Father Gu agreed with a nod. True, my grandmother has always been the head of our family, but Hu Chun's face flushed as he spoke. The other 3 elderly people realized immediately that the elderly woman had most likely died while traveling through the mountains. The village chief spoke up immediately, let's eat. It will not taste good if the food becomes cold. Yes, it's difficult to get meat these days. Father Gu added as he picked up a chicken leg for Hu Chun. Thank you very much, Uncle Gu. Hu Chun thanked him with a nod. They never mentioned Hu Chun's family again after that. Instead, they discussed local customs and briefly described the situation in Qingshui town. Of course, Father Gu was still keeping an eye on Hu Chun. As the saying goes, a person's true self is revealed when drunk. Drinking could provide a glimpse of it. After observing him, he discovered that Hu Chun drank slowly and savored the wine. He was a meticulous and careful individual. Furthermore, regardless of how they persuaded him, he was always polite and restrained. He didn't drink much, demonstrating his strong self-control. This type of individual was either exceptional or formidable. In a nutshell, his future looked promising. When they were nearly finished drinking, the village chief asked, "Do you have any interests outside of work? When you have time, you can play with the village youngster. My favorite pastime is go chess. Chess betting." The patriarch took a breather and asked on purpose. "I've never bet money on chess before. I simply enjoy playing, and the process of playing chess teaches me a lot. I happen to have a set of Go chess at home. When we have some free time, let's play some games." Father Gu went on to say. "Sure, whenever you're available, I'll pay you a visit." Hu Chun smiled in response. His heart skipped a beat after that. He finally realized that the person who wanted to be his matchmaker was almost certainly Father Gu. He remembered Gu Qingya and his sister, whom he had met while collecting firewood 2 days before. His heart stopped beating. It couldn't be that lovely lady, could it? He didn't say anything, despite having a guess. It was better to go with the flow at first. He returned home and briefly explained everything to his uncle. "I didn't expect you to be this popular with the girls this year," Uncle Hu exclaimed as he patted him on the shoulder. Chapter 326 Attracted Uncle, what do you mean? Hu Chun asked in confusion. "You might not know, but many people have asked about you in the past few days. One of them has even sent someone to pass an invitation to marriage. However, one refused to accept it. I said I'd respond after you asked. Can you tell me who it is?" "Zhang Qingqing. Her family is not from one of the village's 2 major clans. She has a mother and a younger brother. I've noticed that young lady before. She is capable, and her appearance isn't bad, but her personality is a little fiery." At this point, his uncle told him about Zhang Qingqing's situation, including how she refused to be sold and went to the Gu family to force them to sell her white potatoes. "This girl is fearless." Hu Chun expressed his admiration. "That is correct. That's why I said she's a little hot-headed but capable of supporting a small family." "Which one would you pick if you had a choice?" Uncle Hu inquired. "We've never even met. What's the big deal?" "The Zhang family has already sent the invitation. The Gu family also hinted enough. You must provide me with a firm response." "What would I reply if the Gu family extends an invitation? However, if you choose the daughter of the Gu family, you must know that her family is guilty to the imperial courts. I'm afraid it will have an impact on your future generation's chances of entering the scholar examinations. Every emperor has different courtiers. Nobody knows for certain. So you're biased against Gu family?" "Yes, the Gu family is guilty, but she is not. She also grew up in the capital and seen a lot. She could read and write, which would be a massive help if I married her. Besides, the Gu family's circumstances aren't doing badly. At the very least, they will not drag us down." Hu Chun elaborated on his reasoning. This was also why, when invited, he agreed to play chess with Father Gu. Uncle Hu immediately recognized Hu Chun's interest in the Gu family's daughter. "You're right, but marriage isn't a business. You cannot evaluate it solely based on your benefits. Furthermore, her mother is difficult to deal with, so you should consider it carefully." "Don't worry, uncle. I'm no longer a young man. I see what you're saying. As for her mother, I'm aware of her, particularly the heinous things she did to Dr. Gu and his wife. However, she is kind to her children. I've also heard she's been picky about Gu Qingya's marriage for over 2 years. Yeah. Anyway, since you are inclined toward the Gu family's daughter, you should get to know her brother better and understand that girl's personality. Oh, one thing you might need to assist me in getting a message to Uncle Gu." Hu Chun asked for help from his uncle. "About?" My ex-fiancé. Tell him about the situation and reassure him. You appear to be serious about this, kiddo. Okay, leave this to me. Over the next 2 days, 111 find someone to deliver the message to him. Gu Chun went to Zhouing the next morning to buy some beef. This was due to his inability to feed so many people with the food supplies he had. Furthermore, the food he had was of poor quality, which wouldn't aid the workers' strength in building houses. Beef and mutton are expensive. You should think about it carefully. Zhouing recognized his intent. The key is that you must stick to this menu once you start. This requires at least 3 heads of cattle. I've given it some thought. Nobody will be able to work if there is no meat. However, one will need your assistance in selecting 2 fatter cattle. At the very least, there will be more lard. You're practical. Zhouing paused briefly before suggesting, it isn't easy for you either. Okay, 111 sell you the cattle for 20 taels of silver each. I'll also sell you some sheep for 5 taels if you want them. One might also be able to use their blood to make blood tofu. Chapter 327 Engaged. Gu Chun did some mental calculations. Beef before the disaster was 30 coppers per pound, and a cow would at least weigh 1,000 pounds. Although it could only produce 500 pounds of meat at most, the bones, blood, and lard were more than enough. 20 taels of silver per head was relatively cheap, judging by that. It was the same for the sheep. Therefore, the price she offered was the price before the drought. Thank you so much, Manager Zhou. 111 have to trouble you to slaughter a cow today. He nodded and gave his confirmation. After that, he handed her 2 ingots worth 1 tael each. Come with me to the manor. After Zhouing finished speaking, she locked up and brought Heir Zhuang to the manor. She went to find Uncle Nian and requested that he help pick a fat and strong cow that weighed about 1,000 pounds and slaughter it. He also processed the cow blood and oil for them. Then, he asked Qian Zhuang to drive the donkey cart to the construction site. After they left, Zhouing expressed her wish, Uncle Nian, it's going to be winter soon. Before the new year, take 5 sheep and 2 cows to nourish everyone's body. You and Changshan can talk about slaughtering and arranging it. Thank you so much, mistress. It just so happens that everyone is short of nutrients these days. It's still early today, so let's slaughter another cow. We'll have some beef soup at noon. Alright, I'll get to it. After saying that, Uncle Nian turned around and left. At noon, Zhouing took charge of the kitchen and made 2 large pots of beef offal soup. She also put some vegetables and dried sweet potatoes in it, satisfying everyone's appetite. After the meal, Zhouing asked people to send 20 pounds of beef, some bones, and blood tofu to Zhaoxing and the others in town. Meanwhile, she took some beef bones and tendons back home, then cooked a big pot of beef soup with the beef meat from her interspace. After it cooled down, it formed a meat jelly similar to jello. She cut them into small pieces and kept them in the refrigerator. This way, it would be convenient to cook them in the future, and she wouldn't have to worry about others smelling the beef and causing trouble. Father Gu was almost done with his examination, but he wasn't satisfied just interviewing Gu Chun, so he told Gu Qingji and Gu Qingye to ask around. At the same time, Gu Chun had also contacted Gu Zishan through the 2 brothers. After everything, Gu Chun and Gu Zishan's marriage was finalized 5 days later. The wedding date was set for the 8th of February, after the beginning of spring. After Zhang Qingqing and her mother received the news, they were both a little disappointed. Besides the Gu family's sinful status, they also knew they weren't a match for the Gu family. In the end, they could only give up. However, the village chief quickly introduced Qian Zhuang to Zhang Qingqing. Their marriage was also quickly settled. Zhou, on the other hand, was unconcerned about these and continued to sell her skincare cream. However, few people in the village could afford it. In the end, only 10 bottles were sold, and 2 bottles were given to outsiders. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. It was now winter, and most of Hu Chun's village houses had been built. After more than 10 days of letting the cement harden, they gradually moved in. Early in the morning, Qian Zhuang came to deliver a letter, saying that the old men of the manor had returned. Uncle Nian said that to welcome them back, they would slaughter sheep. Qian Zhuang invited Zhou to have some mutton soup with them. Zhou saw that the weather was good, so she brought 20 pounds of glass noodles and went to the manor with him. Zhou looked at the few chubbier old men chatting with Manager Lu in full swing. After greeting Manager Lu, she turned to the old men and said, "It seems that you guys have been living a good life promoting the white sweet potatoes." Chapter 328 It's snowing, greetings, mistress. The old men immediately stood up and greeted her. "It's mainly because of mistress that we've been treated as guests, so we got a little fat," said Uncle Sun, the oldest of them. "It's good that you've returned safely. Did your trip go smoothly? The third prince brought us around personally. Other than the first 2 days, when we weren't used to the place and weather, everything went smoothly. Yeah, it's all thanks to Master Gus' medicine. Otherwise, I would not have been able to adjust to the humid environment. It's fantastic that it came in handy. I'll join the kitchen this afternoon and make you some mutton soup." "Thank you, boss." After Zhou knew everything was going well for them, she said a few polite words and turned around to get busy. After lunch, Zhou took a plate of lamb chops and was about to leave when Manager Lu followed her. "Miss Zhou, because of the white potato, the first prince and the fourth prince have sent people over. You guys should try to keep a low profile these days. Just in case, don't spread the news about the white potato flour. *IZ for it / diamond suit it's TI1, you're afraid they'll target us for the vermicelli recipe. That's right. This potato vermicelli is even more delicious than rice vermicelli. On top of that, the yield of white sweet potatoes is high, and I believe it will be popular the year after next." Then, were they the ones who bought the sweet potatoes at a high price? The first prince's men, yes. My men have been watching them, and it seems like they haven't made any big moves, but it's hard to say they won't do anything in the future. I understand. I'll definitely be careful from now on. After Zhou reassured him, she went home with Zhuang. At night, Zhou told Gu Qingrui about the matter. "You should be more careful. I don't know if they will suddenly do something crazy. It just so happens Dr. Luo is also planning to close the clinic soon, so I will stop going tomorrow." "Close down? You don't have any more herbs?" "That's right, Qingshui town's medicinal herbs have been selling without restocking. I used much of it to treat Hu Chun and the others last time, so the stock is almost empty." "That's fine. It's getting cold now, and you won't make much anyway. We can just stay at home and enjoy the winter." "Yup, it'll keep you company." "Alright, should we send some things over to Zhaoqing and the others tomorrow? Bring some veggies over. The amount of grain they have stored is already quite a lot." "Alright, I'll bring some over tomorrow morning." The next day, Gu Qingrui had just set off with a cart full of carrots and cabbages when the wind started to pick up. In the afternoon, the sky was completely dark. When Gu Qingrui returned, it was already snowing. Although they couldn't farm in this weather, the villages were still happy. In particular, those in the outer villages were hoping for more snow. First, it could alleviate the drought. Second, they could start planting next spring if the snow gets heavy. The heavens finally granted the people's wishes, and the drifting snow lasted for 3 days. Although the snow wasn't heavy, it still piled up half a foot thick. It didn't affect their daily lives, so the snow wasn't shoved aside. Everyone gathered around the small river outside the village. The children were so happy that they went to the river to have a snowball fight daily. Therefore, it became a lively scene in the village where parents chased their children with feather dusters for pranking them constantly. The snow gradually stopped at noon on the 4th day, but the sky was still dark. The villages began clearing the snow from their streets. Zhou and Gu Qingrui also walked out with a broom and a shovel. When they saw the Tian couple pushing the snow away with a small cart, they went forward and started shoveling the snow together. When they were almost done, Tian Zhouang said, "Brother Gu, could you help me out this afternoon? I have to erect a wooden pillar in the house." Chapter 329 Snowstorm 1. Why? Is the roof going bad? Gu Qingrui turned his head and asked. Yup, the beam is old, and it's hard to say how long it will last. Tian Zhouang looked up at the gloomy sky and continued, "The weather is getting gloomy lately, and it will be troublesome if it snows heavily." "All right," Gu Qingrui said, nodding. 111 Go over after eating. After that, both of them returned home. After lunch, Gu Qingrui changed into the sackcloth clothes he had worn before and went to the Tian family's house. Soon, Qiunyang came in with Dong Dong in her arms. Zhou immediately greeted them with a smile and put down the book she was reading, saying, "Ah, you've brought Dong Dong out too. Hurry up, put him on the bed, and don't let him catch a cold again." "Sorry for disturbing you, mistress." Qiunyang greeted Zhou as she examined the books inside a cabinet. "What are you talking about? Come, stay here, and chat with me." After Zhou finished speaking, she emptied a small space at the head of her bed and let her put Dong Dong down. She then went to the small red clay tea stove on the tea table not far from the bed, picked up an iron kettle, and poured Qiunyang a cup of boiled water. "Since you can't drink tea now, you should drink some boiled water to warm your hands." "Ah, having such a small stove next to the bed is quite convenient. It's a pity that they don't sell these anymore." Qiunyang commented with longing. If they had such a little thing, they wouldn't have to wake up every night to boil water in the kitchen. "You can make this with a little modification to a broken ceramic pot. It's just that it's a little charcoal hungry." After saying that, Zhou also poured herself a cup of water. After putting down the kettle, she moved to the other side of the table and let Qiunyang sit where she was so that she could take care of her child up close. "How do we modify it?" Qiunyang asked curiously as she held the teacup with both hands. When Zhou saw this, she got up and took a piece of toilet paper and a quill pen. Then, she drew a rough drawing and said, "See. Make a hole at the bottom of the pot, or 2 or 3 small holes will do. Then, find an iron sheet, cut a piece according to the size of the pot, and then cover it up." She paused for a moment. "Just like the water tank where you grow bean sprouts. You cover the bottom and have to find a few stones to prop it up. Now that you mention it, it's similar to a brazier." "Yes, it's just that. It's actually quite simple." "I understand. I'll get one made too." Qiunyang nodded. After that, the two began to chat. When Zhou found out that Qiunyang gets hungry quickly because of breastfeeding, especially when she wakes up from hunger, she taught her how to make French fries and roast white potatoes. Although it didn't taste as good as roasting red sweet potatoes, it could fill one's stomach immediately. At the same time, she gave Qiunyang a few pieces of dried wolf jerky as snacks. After dinner, the couple waited for a while and confirmed that no one had come to visit. Gu Qingrui put on his coat, put out the fire, and locked the door. When he came back, he was covered in snowflakes. Zhou was stunned for a moment before she stood up and asked, "It's snowing again?" "Yeah, and it's snowing quite heavily. It seems that we'll have to worry about the snow during the night. We'll have to sweep the snow off the house in time if it's too heavy." After Gu Qingrui finished speaking, he shook the snow off his coat and placed it at the end of the bed. "Why don't you call Zhuang in? Don't let him catch a cold." "That's true." Gu Qingrui shouted out to Zhuang, who was hiding in the kitchen. He immediately rushed over, and they entered the interspace together. As soon as Zhuang entered, he immediately turned around and ran to the grassland, chasing away the sheep that were leisurely eating grass. Suddenly, there were sounds of bleating all over. Zhou laughed, saying, "It said that dogs are nosy. Looks like Zhuang's been bored." Chapter 330 Snowstorm 2. Yeah, he's just bored after eating and lying around doing nothing. I'm going to feed those animals. Gu Qingrui echoed her and turned around to chase after Zhuang. He drove a tram with Zhuang and started to get busy. As for Zhou, she went to the mountain and got busy. She collected everything that could be collected, especially the rare medicinal herbs. After collecting everything, she saw that it was still early, so she used a pressure cooker to stew a pot of mutton soup. She planned to make soup noodles for tomorrow. After the two of them finished their work, they brought Zhuang out of the interspace. Gu Qingrui was worried about the snow, so he went out to take a look. When he saw that the snow was already a foot thick and was still falling, his heart skipped a beat, wondering if there would be a snowstorm. He quickly put on his military coat and checked the snow on the roof. As expected, the snow on the roof had already piled up thickly. The snow on the end of the roof, in particular, was much higher and piled much thicker than the snow on the ground. He quickly returned to his room and said, "Babe, I'm afraid you won't be able to sleep tonight. Come out and help me hold the ladder. One have to clear the snow on the roof quickly, or it will be dangerous." Zhou Ying's heart skipped a beat when she heard that. She immediately put on her clothes and walked out with him. When she saw the snow falling so heavily that she couldn't see anything more than 2 meters away, she hurriedly helped him sweep the snow off the roof. After sweeping the roof and the shed, Gu Qingrui saw no movement from the other houses. Only then did he remember that the patrol team had retreated since the snow started. "Babe," he said to Zhou, "I have to go find the village chief. Otherwise, half of the houses in the village will collapse tomorrow. It's just waking him up anyway. Why bother going over? Let's just hit a gong or something." When Zhou said this, she paused for a moment because there was no such thing in their house or her interspace. Finally, she simply took out a whistle from her interspace and said, "Let's use this." "That's the only way." Gu Qingrui took the whistle, put it in his mouth, and blew hard. He blew on it the whole time he walked toward the village chief's house. The whistle rang loudly in the quiet night, and it woke up the entire village. At first, everyone was angry when they were woken up, especially those who had children like Tianjiawang. Those children cried and cried. However, the whistle did not stop. People soon realized something had happened, and each family immediately sent someone out to check what was happening. When they saw the heavy snow outside, they immediately shouted in horror. Suddenly, the entire village was in an uproar. Everyone scrambled to clear the snow from their roofs. When Gu Qingrui arrived at the village head's house, the two brothers, Qian Jiaxi and Qian Jiala, had already started working together to sweep the snow off the roof. The village chief raised his head and looked at the snow in a daze. "Grandpa Qian," Gu Qingrui quickly stepped forward. The village chief patted him on the shoulder, then sighed with a heavy face, "Thanks, boy. I thought we could hide from it, but it came regardless." Gu Qingrui immediately knew what he meant. He didn't know how to reply to that. Who would have thought they would encounter a snowstorm after they avoided the drought and the flood? Even if they wanted to escape, they probably had nowhere to run. He replied, "Since you're up, I'll go back now." After he finished speaking, he turned around and walked back. On the way, he went to the patriarch and his old house. After making sure that they were all awake, he rushed home. When he returned, the roof was again covered with a thick layer of snow. The snow on the ground was almost 2 feet thick, illustrating the heavy snowstorm. Chapter 331 Snowstorm 3. However, no one had the time to complain. They were only thinking about how to keep their houses intact. Otherwise, they would freeze to death. The villagers were busy the whole night, some even found new materials to reinforce their roofs. It was not until the next morning that the snow gradually lessened. However, the snow on the ground was already 5 feet deep. If someone didn't have their door opened, it would take them a long time to do so. Zhou finished helping Gu Qingrui and made a lamb stew in her interspace. After the two finished breakfast, they took a shower and left the interspace. When she saw the snow outside, piled nearly as tall as a person, she took out a pair of sleighs and said, "Rui, you stay at home just in case. I need to go to the manor." "Are you kidding me? The snow that just fell is especially soft, and there is no snow path. It will be difficult to get out if you accidentally fall into the snow. Besides, with Manager Lu there, everything would be fine. Even if there's something, it's too late to go over now. Let's wait for the snow to stop completely, then, we'll make a plow to go over." Qingrui stopped her. He was also concerned about the cattle and sheep in the manor, as they were the only sources of food for the inhabitants on the surface. However, no matter their importance, they were not as important as their lives. He could not take the risk. Zhou hesitated for a moment. Looking at the frighteningly thick snow, she finally gave up. The two cleared a path from their kitchen to the woodshed and quickly started a fire. It was almost noon when the short path was cleared, but the snow was still falling. After lunch, they went into the house to read a book while observing the snow. By nighttime, the snow had lessened. By midnight, the snow had gradually stopped. Only then did Zhou and Gu Qingrui lie down and have a good sleep. When the snow started falling, people were on duty in the cattle and sheep shed in the manor. That was why they had discovered the possibility of a snowstorm earlier than anyone else. The person on duty immediately called for everyone to get busy, so other than wasting some firewood in the cattle and sheep sheds, there were no casualties. However, Manager Lu and the others could no longer live in their tents. Half of them crammed into the courtyard, while the other half crammed into the newly constructed dormitory. As for Hu Chun's newly built village, although they discovered the snowstorm a little late, their house was newly built, so they were fine. However, their food supplies were usually bought daily. They could, at most, last for 10 more days with their supplies, but the road might not even be cleared in a month, let alone 10 days. Therefore, when Hu Chun saw the situation outside early in the morning, he was so anxious that his mouth began to froth. He immediately called out for everyone to quickly clear the roads to the village. As for the other villages, including the town, most of the inhabitants discovered the snowstorm too late and had their roofs collapse. They had to wait for rescue and just try to hold on and survive. So when the snow stopped, the people finally heaved a sigh of relief. But when they looked at the snow outside their homes, they all started to worry. On the morning of the third day, Gu Qingrui woke up and said, "Babe, let's use your interspace to suck in the snow. It'll be troublesome if the snow starts to melt after being piled up." "Alright, I'll put them in the storeroom." After Zhou finished speaking, she put her hand directly on the snow to try, but she could only put a palm-sized piece in each time. She then looked at Gu Qingrui with an embarrassed expression on her face. Gu Qingrui smiled. Take out the small card from the villa. Try it again once it's filled. Zhou Ying nodded and did as she was told, and she found it could be stored in her interspace that way. After they found a way, they started to get busy. They moved most of the snow in the yard into the interspace, and by noon, they could open their door. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.